perfect. That's something that my CEO said to me all the time. If you let perfect get in the way, you're never going to get anything done. So please get it up, get it on. If you, in this instance, get it up on the blockchain. And if it sucks and you hate it, take it off. If someone buys it, obviously you're screwed. But hey, if someone buys it, you're in a better position. So next one, it's totally okay not to know something. Oh yeah, that's true. If you don't know what's going on, you are probably not alone, because that's a big thing. I've asked some stupid questions. These guys will tell you I only ask stupid questions. I feel like it's kind of my thing. I ask a ton of stupid questions, and I feel like it's okay if you don't know the answer, or even if you don't even pretend to know the answer. Just ask the question. Next one. Have fun. Honestly, I think unless you're doing it for a client, if you're doing it, obviously all these new projects that are coming out, new things happening, you might be up against a deadline that's not self-imposed, all these different things, but try to have fun. I do believe at the heart of this, especially where we are now in these collectibles and these NFTs, I do believe it's fun. And if we do it right, it's going to come through in the collectible aspect. People will be more excited about collecting it too. If the Discord's active, you guys are having fun, and all of a sudden someone comes in, it's like you go to Discord and the party's happening. People are excited about it, but if it's a dead Discord, why would anyone want to be hanging out there? So, next one. So yes, please connect with me. This is my OpenSea account. I have a ton of different NFTs that I have that are my own different things. This is it. Next one. So this is my LinkedIn profile. This is the code here. If you could scan that, the first person, my phone is down in the green room there, but the first person that gets it will get an NFT, will get a regular dude. So please, if that doesn't work, please make sure to get that. I want to make sure everyone can scan that. So I don't want to get in the way. We're good? Good? Okay. All right, next slide. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much. I guess I'll open it up to questions. I don't know if I can answer them, but I'll try my best. Next, if we have any questions? Oh, you're going to run her? Okay. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Alex, everybody. Hey, thank you. Fast.
Hey, Chris. So what was your most challenging aspect throughout this whole journey?
Wow, that's a really good question. Most challenging aspect was literally trying to pretend that I knew, or at least come off like I knew what I was doing when I didn't. And that's the thing, is that I had to basically be confident in what I was about to do. Every step of the way I had to learn. And I think that's challenging. That's extremely challenging. So that's why I put it upon myself to learn this thing, the whole regular dudes thing. As cool as it may have been, or as funny or silly, whatever it is, the idea was that whole thing was to learn, and it has been so valuable in the sense of, it's crazy. Some people come to me and they want to get their wallets. Hey, I want a regular dude. Do you have a wallet? And all of a sudden I became, I don't want to even say, because these guys will laugh at me, I became the expert in certain aspects of this in my office, and now they're coming to me, they want to get their wallet sent up, they want to get the OpenSea account, they want to start doing it. I have a buddy in our work who's a motion designer, and he's like, I should be doing this, and it's like, yes, you should be doing it. So the most challenging part was pretending, or at least faking it till I made it, fake it till you make it kind of a thing, until I did. And that's tough, because especially in work, when it's just your own thing, you could fake it till you make it all day long. But when you're getting paid to do so, you got to make it pretty quick. So, that's the thing. Any other questions? I feel like there's got to be more question. One more question. No?
So I got one. So as a dude holder,
yes.
When are we going to have Dude Fest?
Dude Fest. Yeah. So we are working on a couple of really cool things. Once the Bill Murray thing launches, we will definitely pivot to focus more attention on the regular dudes and just kind of what that thing does. I have grand goals of doing a breakfast cereal. That's like one of my things I've always wanted to do, is a breakfast cereal. I think regular dude breakfast cereal would be amazing. I think a taco truck, we've talked about, maybe even donuts. Downuts has been talked about, bringing it out, dropping knowledge, he told it. Dude Fest, the only problem with Dude Fest, you have to be careful with how that thing goes down, but yeah.
Right on. Well, if worst comes to worst, we'll put it on Calpe Drive.
Exactly. So yeah.
Can women be a part of the regular dudes?
Very good
'Cause
question.
you named all the things I
Literally
love, so.
every single woman in our office asked this question. Where's the dudettes? How can we get a dudette? The thing is a dude is what you would buy, and you would get a dudette if you were a holder. So yes, absolutely. That's down the road. I kind of was reluctant to even think about that, but the idea is every single person wants one, even if you're a holder, you want to get one for your wife or your girlfriend or whoever. So yes, dudettes are coming. Yes, dudettes are coming. Yes. Is that it?
So you just mentioned one, and then you mentioned, Sarah, what are some of the other IRL things you want to do to bridge Web 2 and Web 3?
For dudes or for Bill Murray? Which one? Dudes. I mean...
Can you say that one more time?
That was the other question. You talked about licensing issues. How'd you get the Vinkman without having to mess with that kind of licensing? Because that is a character.
That is a very good question. We work with Bill Murray very closely, and he has kind of given us his blessing to a certain degree on things. Now, if the rubber hits the road, we could be in trouble. We're hoping that won't be an issue. But for your first question in real life stuff, I mean, I think we definitely would love to once this thing gets going, the regular dudes thing happens. I think there could be a really cool dude meeting, a meetup. You know, I mean, we've heard these DAOs that are happening. ATX DAO did a big thing. We want to do something like that. We want people to come out and hang out. And again, the expectation is nothing. It's like, let's just hang. There's no, I mean, let's have fun with it. Again, the idea was exactly. That would be fun. So we're thinking, how can we do it? One thing is the first 35 people that were kind of in with the regular dudes are going to be able to vote on what we do next. And then we're going to do the next round. Those people will hopefully be a part of it too. But so we're hoping to have it be a thing. I mean, again, this is very much an organic, creator-based NFT project that if it works, it's working for the right reasons. It's because we want to make something cool. We want to hang out with our people that are into the same stuff that we're into. And we'll see what happens. Oh, yeah.
All right, Chris Baumley, everybody. So everybody, please sit tight and we're gonna have a little bit of a set change, move the chairs and tables around. We're gonna invite our friends from the Meta Governance Group and Stakefish to set up shop for a validator forum looking at responsibility in the proof of stake ecosystem. For all y'all who are in NFTs and you're wondering, why should I care about governance? You gotta understand that is like the fundamentals of how the blockchain works. And when you're asking about like, how do I get cooler smart contracts that make more interesting NFTs? That's where it starts. So I really, really encourage y'all, hang out for this. You're gonna learn a lot. But for now, maybe get up and out of your chairs so we can get them all moved around. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just for a beat, if you're here for Epic Dylan, just know that we're going to move that down to the podcast studio. So keep an eye on the live stream and check out the podcast afterwards. Thank you.
All right, all right. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey. Hope everyone's having a good time. We've got the setup mostly in place now. So I'd ask you guys to start making your way this way. Anyone who is directly participating, hello, in the back. Hey, hey. If you are directly participating in the Meta Governance Stakefish Validator Jam, I'd ask you to take a seat at the main table. If you're a spectator, listener, learner, there's plenty of seats around the side. Be helpful to get a count. If we need more chairs, we have them. If you guys could start to find your seats, that would be super duper helpful so we can get this show on the road. Only 30 minutes behind schedule, no big deal. No big deal, we got all day. But thanks for finding your seats. Let's start getting settled. Grab the food and drinks that you need. Let's go. Let's fucking go. All right, we're making progress, getting better. To all you folks in the back, if you're participating, come on over this way. Just don't want to be moving the furniture around once we get started. All right, last few folks, want to make your way this way. Make sure we have enough chairs. There's another row of chairs over here in the back. And we're going to get started in just a minute. Here we go.
I think we should just, this one is enough, but we can use that for questions. Yeah, it's a little bit more fun. Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Governance Jam, Validator Governance Jam. I'm Josh from MetaGov. I'm the Executive Director of MetaGov, and MetaGov is a nonprofit that builds standards and infrastructure for online governance. And it is my pleasure today to announce in this very room perhaps the world's first crypto political party. The Validator Commons. All right. If you are confused by what that means, don't worry. We are too. But we're going to figure that out together over the next couple of hours and explore what this means for proof-of-stake governance, for blockchains, and for the validators themselves, many of whom I see gathered around here around this table. All right. So I'm not going to spend too much time, I think, what's the right word, introducing the Validator Commons itself, but I want to give you a little bit of context for how this project got started. Approximately 4 months ago, some folks like Daniel and Teddy at Stakefish reached out to me about starting a standards process, like technical standards process for validator governance. And pretty soon after that, we assembled this amazing team from folks including Figment, Chainflow, Chorus One, and of course Stakefish. And we've been working together over the past 4 months to figure out essentially like technical standards for validator governance and sort of reporting and verification of that kind of governance. At some point, I don't know when the magic hour was exactly, we realized, oh wait, we're kind of building a political party here. We were kind of coordinating around voting, figuring out what kind of infrastructure we needed to make the change that we wanted to see. And we decided to bite the bullet and call it what it is. So it has been a fabulous time for me and incredible learning experience. And I hope the next 2 hours will be an incredible learning experience for all of you as well. So with that, let me introduce Daniel Huang, Head of Protocols at Stakefish, who will tell you a little bit more about what the Validator Commons is and what it is seeking to achieve.
Thanks, Josh. So just to add some additional context to what Josh was saying there was definitely this sort of immaturity that we were seeing, lack of accountability that we had kind of felt with the governance process and a lot of these chains that did have exposed on-chain governance. And so we had really been excited about trying to get someone external from a validator, like an independent third party, like what MetaGov was doing to help coordinate us without coming from like a place of like bias or subjectivity. And as many of you guys know at this table, for those who've been validating certain chains that we've had, a lot of messiness, and it was quite embarrassing. So, right, we had initially started, as Josh was saying, what are the types of responsibilities or standards or frameworks that we can apply onto these chains for validators to follow, especially in the absence of centralized authorities that are kind of holding us accountable if we do screw up. And so what we ended up doing is, okay, we have like these ideas that we wanted to impress upon these chains for other validators to follow, but that inherently is sort of authoritarian. So, right, we said we at least at the validators at the table that we're gathering had some ideas that we wanted to give people, but we didn't want it to have it sort of be a place of we are the central authority. So if we have a small group of people that do believe in a shared set of values, that then will be kind of collected into, I guess, what we would say is a political party. But yeah, and then I think my colleague Teddy can kind of explain a bit more from where we're coming from that.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Dan. One thing I want to add here is I think part of what we're trying to do here, in addition to declare the existence of this body of validators that hopefully share these values and hope to advance those values within the broader ecosystem, is this idea that blockchains themselves, in addition to having this fundamental technological component and fundamental economic component, also have this fundamental political component. And this is something that a lot of people actually try to ignore in this space. The libertarian roots, the cyberpunk roots of crypto, in many ways abhors government. And that was sort of part of the original intent to build systems that were resistant to centralized authority in general. But we believe here today that there's a difference between coordination towards what we see as a common good, towards values, and I guess the negative version of that, collusion, towards some kind of centralized bad. And we do think that it is justifiable to work together towards common good as validators. We think that that's how validators can set themselves apart from each other. Rather than racing to the bottom, reducing fees, trying to find cheaper hardware, validators can set themselves apart on the basis of good governance. So I'll leave you with that, and then we'll, I guess, I'll pass it over to Ellie, who's also and I'll sit back down.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ellie Rennie. I work at RMIT University. So MetaGov, as well as doing all this important governance work, is also kind of a research collective. I've been the researcher in the room for this process alongside Josh, and I'm an ethnographer. So I would call myself a participant observer in the process of getting to this point. So it's been a great journey so far, and it's continuing, and you're all now part of that by being in this room. So we have a panel here today of some of the people who have been involved in discussions over the months. And I'll get them to introduce themselves very briefly, actually. I think it's better if you do that.
I'm Vic Call from Chorus One, which of course is a validator based out of Europe, and I work in the business development team.
Teddy Knox, Steakfish.
Othman from Chainflow.
Elizabeth from Figment was also supposed to be on the panel, but we couldn't bring her in, so unfortunately she's not here. I'm actually going to get Vic to very quickly just tell people what a validator service provider is, in case there's anyone in the room that's just kind of landed here and doesn't know what you do. What is the importance for proof-of-stake blockchains?
Sure, yeah. So the way it works is that there are two types of chains. There's the proof-of-work chain, and the best example of that is Bitcoin, and Ethereum for now is a proof of work as well, where for you to issue the next block, for you to basically issue the next set of...
You gotta talk a little closer.
Okay, sorry, okay. For you to issue the next set of transactions on the blockchain, there's work you have to perform, which is the compute work that they have to do. The issue with doing it in that approach is that environmentally, as you guys have probably heard, that's very intense, and there's concern around that. The other way of doing this is proof of stake that came out maybe about 5-6 years ago. And there's several good examples of that. There's Cosmos was one of the first ones that came out. Ethereum is in the way of transitioning from how they do this to proof of stake. And most of the other major networks today are all based on proof of stake. So going forward, if someone were to create a new chain, the way they would verify and issue blocks would be through proof of stake. The way proof of stake works is that there are a set of folks around the world, and these are what we call validators, who are responsible for looking through the transactions and issuing them on the blockchain. So depending on the particular blockchain, the blockchain will decide on how often the block gets issued, what's the size of the block, and then it's up to the validators to reach consensus to issue that block. And that all gets defined by the blockchain itself as well. And then depending on the particular chain, you may have 100 validators, you may have several 100,000 validators. An example is Ethereum, which today probably has 400,000 validators working on ETH2. Something like Near has about 100 validators for their chain. So that count varies. And again, the role of the validators is to issue the next block on the chain, to hold them honest and kind of decide on who gets to do that. In some cases, they get nominated by the chain, and then the other thing that's important is, and in some cases, they can self-select. But in all cases, what's required is that they have to put up collateral, in a sense, that is at risk if they don't behave. And then depending on the blockchain, they may have different rules for how that collateral gets used and how they get penalized and slashed for that. So that's the role that that we play as Chorus One and at Stakefish and the other folks who are here. Is we are a validator. Most of us would be validating a few dozen different chains, and then for each of those chains, there's collateral that we have put up on the chain, not directly ourselves, but folks who delegate assets to us is what we put at risk.
Okay, Othman. Why does governance among validators matter? In other words, why did you get involved in this?
So at Chainflow, we value various layers of decentralization, especially like keeping stake decentralized. And that's essentially because a lot of the times on these networks, we see delegators delegate to centralized exchanges or large validators that don't necessarily vote on proposals and stuff. And we find that that's an issue. And we found the Validator Commons to perfectly align with our values because they see governance participation as an issue that needs to be addressed. And yeah, they see governance participation as an issue that needs to be addressed. And wait, sorry, give me a second. Yeah, they see governance participation as an issue that needs to be addressed. And it's just as important as maintaining infrastructure, which is a responsibility of the validator. And I personally focus on voting and making proposals and keeping track of proposals on different networks. And it's important to distribute the stake appropriately so that different, validators have a voice and people can maintain the health and longevity of the different networks that they operate on.
Thank you. So, Teddy, what are the risks here if we don't align around governance with validators? And do you have any examples of when, I suppose, you've had to make hard governance decisions?
So risks when we don't align, as in when validators disagree. Well, of course, there's always the
don't govern at all.
Don't govern at all. Yeah. So I think the fundamental risk is just sort of a state of nature where you have property rights and you have people who have assets, and then if assets get stolen, then that's just kind of how it goes. So in the absence of any real governance, you kind of have, again, you have this anarchy, which some people really like and are actually very appropriate for a very specific context. Like, I think Bitcoin will always be this way. In the proof of stake context, if you're not governing, the entire chain doesn't work, because proof of stake fundamentally is when you're delegating, you're choosing who to trust. So that is, by virtue of its design, governance. So then, the chain doesn't work. But I think in general, we're thinking very much additively here. Like, how can we improve blockchains through governance? Because they seem to work fine without that much governance. But could they work better with a little bit more? Specifically, proof of stake chains that aren't necessarily oriented around this sort of fundamental layer of store of value, where they could potentially differentiate themselves on the basis of good governance and safe commerce and having all these protections that we like to enjoy in the traditional financial world. A good example of that, we have we have a Juno person at this table who is all too familiar with the Juno Proposition 16, which was a signaling proposal to seize the assets of a Juno holder who received a lot of Juno through an airdrop where they were not intended to. So they ended up with a huge percentage of Juno stake or Juno token, and the community actually really didn't like this. This new community of Juno holders who participated in the airdrop fairly didn't like this, and so they instituted the signaling proposal, which passed, which was to the effect of, we want to seize the assets of this Juno whale on the basis of their unfair gaming of the airdrop. Now that was just what they said. It's actually kind of a complicated issue. It was somewhat accidental that this whale received these funds, but just in doing that, they immediately shattered this concept within Juno of the sanctity of property rights and just sort of, I guess, people maintaining control over what they had. In the absence of any form of structured, designed governance, what we're going to have is situations like this where proposals come out that can basically change anything, at least within the Cosmos ecosystem that's possible. And that is not much better than the previous system, or I guess what we're used to, for example, on Bitcoin, where there's none of that at all. Because suddenly you're giving people unlimited power on the basis of, pure, direct democracy. So the idea is, what if we can institute a designed system that controls this power and limits it in the same way that political philosophers have talked about for centuries, such that the whole, the entire blockchain or set of blockchains that we think about this way are improved.
So in practical sense, how do we actually do that? I mean, what kinds of tools are missing, or and also, I suppose, the relationship with the developers themselves. What's needed to make governance more legible, more accountable, whatever it might be? I'm going to let anyone answer this question who wants to take it.
Yeah, I think in terms of what's missing is, yes, I think fundamentally there's no formal process for this today, right? So what is formalized is the fact that there's a proposal that gets put up, there's a proposal that gets researched, voted on, and then implemented. What's not codified well, and where there aren't, depending on which chain you're talking about, it may be at different levels of maturity. Depending on the validator groups you're talking about, they may also be at a different level of maturity in terms of, what is the level of participation that happens, what's the level of investigation, research that takes place before they make the vote, right? So those are the things that need to get defined and agreed upon so that people can be more effective as they make these decisions. But otherwise, it's kind of up to the people to make it up as they go along, yeah.
We're going to move into breakout groups soon, but I first want to give anyone on this panel, or even Josh or Daniel, a chance to, I suppose, tell us what this means for decentralization in blockchains, this particular political party or alignment around values of good governance by validators.
I feel that it's important for validators to be very intentional when they operate on their networks in terms of participation, in order to improve the health of the network. And like what you said earlier, this is a step in the right direction in terms of what we need. There's a common goal that us validators see, and there's a missing piece, in terms of the progress that we need to continue operating and just doing stuff on these blockchains. And this is part of the missing piece in terms of this is just part of the missing piece, is essentially what I'm saying.
So I think when we use this word decentralization, which is totally loaded at this point, whatever, 10 years in, we refer to a lot of things, but the way I think about it is decentralization is about resiliency, making sure the network stays up, but it's mainly about corruption resistance. Basically making sure that the person who controls the ledger, or the place where the ledger is administrated, is not an entity that can be corrupted. It's not somebody's computer that they can kind of arbitrarily update. It's something that's managed by the group. That goal is always going to be better served by a system that doesn't have any kind of politics, right? Like Bitcoin is always going to be extremely good at resisting corruption because there's really not a lot of change to how it works under the hood from a political perspective. If you're proposing a change to Bitcoin Core, you're proposing it on the basis of technology, not on the basis of any kind of changes to who has what. There is a bit of a trade-off there. But I do not see that trade-off as being one that inevitably leads to centralization. I don't think that working to have validators coordinate towards a vision of the future necessarily taking us all the way to centralization. I think it's possible to still be decentralized, but work together on the basis of delegators who elect us, who say, we believe in what you are doing. And if we stop acting in their interest, let's say they think that we are being corrupt, they can redelegate. So I don't think we make much of a sacrifice of decentralization here by working together towards good goals, good ends.
Maybe I'll just add one thing, because I find it kind of funny that we put people in front of, in a room, in front of an audience, and we start saying like, oh, things that sound a little bit more diplomatic. Whereas one of the things that motivated, let's say what's written literally up there in our declaration, right, is this sense that if you look at proof-of-stake blockchains as they currently exist, and you look at the role of the different parties and entities that actually govern these things, there is already a relatively centralized and extremely powerful force that is at work, and it is the foundations and core teams that kind of drive these blockchains and drive these protocols, right? And hey, we have like one of these core team folks right here. And of course, like that's necessary and a natural part of how these chains work. But also by design, they should be governed by the people, governed democratically. And that governance doesn't work unless validators participate. And yes, we are coordinating between validators, but I think if the goal of that coordination is to amplify and to increase participation, to make this democratic system actually work in practice as opposed to just in theory. I think that's at least the way I think about it when I think about having a crypto political party in this and how it implicates or how it affects these different notions of decentralization.
I'm going to open it up to the floor. If anyone has a question or a comment at this point, and anyone in the audience, really. We've definitely got some MetaGov political experts in the room and a number of people who are core developers or involved in foundations, but also interested in hearing from other validators who might be here too. So raise your hand. Rick.
Yeah, hey, thanks for organizing this, guys. This is a very, very interesting initiative. As I look at the declaration back behind you here, are the bullet points I'm seeing on the screen all of the bullet points, or is there more to it than this? That's all of them. What I don't see up there is I don't see anything relating to the potential for conflict of interest by professional validators who validate for a large number of different projects. And it seems to me that that's something that should be addressed. I assume that this has been thought about on your side, because I know Ellie and I have at least touched on it in a conversation over a cocktail once.
No, I think I agree with that also. I think a lot of us have kind of had this like kumbaya multi-chain, we're all gonna succeed together. But I think eventually as we mature, as time goes on, a lot of these chains will be competitive with each other, and those communities themselves will request or even require the validators that do validate those chains to take sides. The conflicts of interest I don't think even stop there, right? Even with validators that do invest into these ecosystems, the types of fiduciary duties that they have to that ecosystem and its long-term potential also are at conflict with sometimes governance does, or the types of principles that you do want to have on those chains with, right? Some chains will have different principles, do butt heads with that. So I think it's gonna come. We've seen it happen before, right? We've seen like Gavin Wood from Polkadot say like in the beginning they're not ETH competitors, but then later when he got enough air in his chest, like he said, yeah, they're a competitor to Ethereum. Maybe it's important that there is this sort of kumbaya mentality so that we can build strong foundations and establish some of these frameworks or standards so that we can understand how to govern these chains. And then, right, when people go off to the races to compete, we'll have a better place to start from. But yeah, I mean, I think there's so much conflict of interest right now. Maybe there hasn't been significant enough fiascos or situations that required us to kind of think deeply about this. Maybe there are some, I think, with the validators that have been meeting weekly for a couple of months now, we've been kind of trying to grok this process. But yeah, the way that Teddy was saying, right, when validators do want to kind of communicate with each other in sort of like this thin line between collusion and cooperation, like it definitely shouldn't be the case where I'm getting like DMs from other validators saying, hey, how did you vote on this? What should we do? And like that's literally not what we're supposed to be doing as independent entities. Even when like, right, Chris Remus from Chainflow, right, he wrote this amazing article called The Rise of the Activist Validator, and it's these foundation teams who are supposedly supposed to be checked and balanced against validators that are independent of them, saying like, yeah, we've done substantial foundation delegations to these validators, jump, and a lot of the validators just say how high. And then there are these like influencer demagogues that do kind of dictate a lot on crypto Twitter or whatever forums that there are, right? That should be a conflict of interest too. There's so many problems, and there's this sort of lack of central authority that is allowing us to kind of look to one place to say, what should we do? And right, it's just like this bystander effect. No one is taking ownership of this, right? We all, like when we have conversations with each of you, yeah, we all agree that these are problems. And then we all have our own priorities or fires that we need to put out, and then it gets left alone. So there's many more conflicts of interest that I think, right, weren't able to just be all included in these. Maybe some of these bullet points do have to include like, right, a lemma or something addition to that.
Yeah, and I think this is very much, first draft, so we can build on it. Zaki, did you have a question or comment? Who else had their hand up? Yeah.
So, I think it's important to recognize that governance isn't the ultimate authority on chains. Like the entire point of blockchains isn't that governance is not the ultimate authority. The ultimate authority is the consensus of all of the people who voluntarily choose to participate in the blockchain. And governance was always intended just merely as a coordination mechanism. And it's sort of unclear how that's supposed to evolve. I don't think this is an illegitimate mechanism for its evolution of that coordination mechanism. The coordination mechanism clearly doesn't work that well right now, so I'm very encouraged to see this kind of activity. But I think it is worth recognizing the limits of governance, that governance is not the ultimate authority in any sort of blockchain protocol. It is ultimately the willingness of people to run the software and participate in the system that is the ultimate authority.
Yeah, I think Zeki made some pretty good points there. I kind of want to say, from my perspective, there's already a lot of good governance solutions that have been considered through open source development outside of cryptocurrencies, and it tends to break down into a do-ocracy with maybe some sense of the original vision of the founder or benevolent dictator for life, or the original team or what have you. And I think that crypto has fantasized about this idea that validators, because they choose to run infrastructure that builds blocks on the chain, are also the same people who are contributing any of the code to the repo, which is not true, or have a sophisticated opinion about any of the features, let alone all of the features. There really ought to be some sort of protocol politician layer. I think Zargam and I had a long conversation about this on YouTube a year or two ago, where people who actually do understand the potential consequences of any particular feature discuss those things, maybe even simulate those things, and then the validators, in my opinion, really shouldn't be that much of a focal point. It's really the voters or the token holders themselves who would want to vote on something like this. The entire idea that in Cosmos, all these delegators are voted on, their votes are considered to basically follow validators seems kind of bizarre. And also, there's nothing here for token holders who are not delegators. In Ethereum, you can vote by having the token, not necessarily giving it to anyone, like a validator or whatnot. And in Cosmos, there is no way to be pooling or just holding a token and vote. I think there's maybe other things I could contribute here, but I just definitely want to say there should be some separation between a protocol politician who understands some or probably not all, but some of the features being discussed, and validators who, as far as I can tell, are primarily responsible for just running infrastructure.
I'd like to give the opportunity for validators to respond to that. Which one of you?
We certainly understand that this represents a potentially contrarian viewpoint. That validators, or I think we should be more specific, those on-chain with the power of on-chain governance, which is specifically what we're referring to here, and not just infrastructure, should recognize that they have that authority and that there should be grassroots organization within that group of people. And I guess organizations. I don't think it's much more profound than that. I think that the same kind of foundational work on code that happens from foundations can be initiated from within coalitions of validators. I think validators can establish funding from on-chain treasury to support foundational development, client development, research, all of that. That doesn't necessarily always have to come from the, I guess, the point of incubation of the chain. We are not, I mean, you look at this declaration, and it doesn't have a lot in terms of exactly what we want to achieve, but I think that's because right now we're actually starting at the very basic level, which is saying we think that validators should work together to achieve what they think is best, and that validators, or specifically those in charge of on-chain governance, have authority in that.
And yeah, I think what you said was like really important. I remember I was moderating a panel with a few validators and I asked them like, why do you not communicate how you're voting to your stakers or your delegators? And then they just said they didn't have time to check all the on-chain governance proposals. And then they even went as far as to say that if they had the option to just only do infrastructure management and not have to deal with governance, they would prefer that. And maybe it's the fault of the system designers who created these systems that have just kind of put this on our lap as validators, saying, okay, you're going to be a validator, you're going to also participate in governance. Maybe there is this evolution. Yeah. Maybe there is an evolution that we can have where we are seeing this breakdown in terms of the people, maybe validators who can run infrastructure and manage that, don't have the capacity to maybe by time or resources or even technical acumen or intelligence be able to responsibly do this type of governance. Yeah, maybe that is a separation, but the base reality right now is that it's all just put on our laps. And I'm not saying that we're as validators, we're rejecting it, but that's what it is. And we're struggling, some validators may be struggling to figure out how to do this, especially in these multi-chain sort of worlds, right? Let's say, even if, for example, we can use the Juno example with what happened on Proposal 20. All 125 validators did not check the code that we deployed into a live production environment that sent $36 million into a dead address instead of a shared smart contract. And so then where does the responsibility lie? Was the responsibility for that code to be correct coming from the core developers that pushed it out to us, and there was no other independent third party that was to do that audit or was supposed to fund that? And then if that is also that responsibility of validators to manage that infrastructure and also participate in governance, and that inheritance of that responsibility of governance is supposed to allow them to be directing the chain, then a lot of validators were unclear about what their role was in that system. And after that huge mess up, no one was held accountable. All the validators, all 125 of us included, nothing happened. There was no accountability that happened. Maybe it was embarrassing for all of us. Yeah, and so I really do think that there is a chance for this evolution to happen where we can have independent third parties that can participate separate from infrastructure management. But right now, the way it stands is that we have to do both. Yeah, so.
Zagam.
Hello? Okay, cool. So I think just from the comments from Jazir and the more recent comments, there's an observation there that, we discussed this, political party of validators, but honestly, what I'm hearing is that the scope of the political activity extends beyond validators. So whether it's protocol designers, or other people who are participating in research at various stages, and analytics, quality assurance, etc. My intuition is that in order to accomplish the goals of a political party at a level of public service and quality assurance, that it might be necessary to both scope out some of the other stakeholder groups, or not even stakeholder groups, actually just functional roles that would need to be fulfilled, and then have the coordination that you speak of not necessarily occur amongst the validators, oh man, this is saddled on our on our shoulders and we don't have a choice, but rather to say, there are multiple functions here. We want to coordinate. We want to be decentralized, so we don't necessarily want to bring that in-house, but then to, in identifying those other roles, actually seek to fill them. It's my intuition, at least, that that's possible, and that a political party might actually be the right means of approaching it, precisely because even in as much as we may dislike the existing political systems, you don't see political parties say, well, there are only senators in my political party, right? You've got people across from the individual, in our case, delegators, people delegating, who would be voting, as well as any other stakeholders in the system who may choose to voice their opinions. And to be blunt, I think the absence of vocal non-immediate contributors is one of the reasons why we have such strong bully pulpits, like, founder profits basically manufacturing consent for proposals. So we don't have proposal writers from the public. We don't have quality assurance from the public. We don't have, and again, here in the public, I just mean anyone who's a stakeholder to these systems. I don't personally think it's on your shoulders. I think a truly decentralized system is one where we recognize these roles, we draw them up and sort of make it clear to everyone that they need to be fulfilled, and then sort of recognize the value that the validators provide, but also recognize the value that anyone within these ecosystems could provide. And the political party, to kind of tie it back to this event, creates a place for people to say, share the animating values, like why are we doing this? What does it public good mean in this context? Because it can vary. So anyway, just an invitation to consider more classes of contributor.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'd actually be curious, like what you or the rest of you guys think of, and if the decision making should not come from necessarily from the validators, or should be bubbling up from the validators. And it is, right, we in these, let's say this 3-entity system of the foundation / core dev team, the validators who are running the infrastructure, and the stakeholders, the stakers, right? There's these relationships between the validator and the core dev foundation teams, and then also the staker and the validator. And I guess it was assumed that the staker should be holding the validators accountable for what they should be doing. But the reality is that, right, especially in this sort of multi-chain sort of system, people just use these tokens and they delegate them to us just to get an APY. They haven't been calling for like, hey, can you tell me what you validator voted on, and do I agree with those? Maybe the unfortunate reality is that they just don't care. And if they don't care, that the way that this has been designed is that there is no accountability there's no accountability that validators are having to live up to, because we're not being held by this like apathetic public. Yeah.
So it's not entirely appropriate to say that people don't care if they don't have the equipment required for actually holding you accountable. So like in my experience, it's even with relatively qualified data engineers and data scientists, quite some work to sort of mine out of, and it's different for different chains because their data structures are different, to actually extract the details of those behaviors in order to hold you accountable. So even if we believe that it is appropriate for at least some subset of, again, third parties, individuals, people running applications that allow them to see, to participate in that accountability process, it's just not necessarily appropriate to say, well, you must not care, you didn't do it, because the frictions are so high. And so there's also room for, funding efforts to develop whatever the accountability appropriate, like public transparency products would be, to make it so that it isn't incredibly difficult to do that accountability work.
Yeah, and I would actually be curious. So I think many of us were validators on Juno, right? This is like a hot chain that a lot of crazy stuff is happening on, but right, really important value being extracted from it, from like the lessons that we've been learning from real people voting, right? Like I don't think ever we've seen 99% of all staked tokens like vote on things, right? Even within our company, like there were very mixed opinions on like the practicality of being able to be responsible for the type of auditing or vetting we are doing, right? I obviously had strong opinions of like, yeah, validators should validate, right? We should be like checking what we're putting out into these production environments because we're doing it on behalf of these ecosystems. But like for other validators, maybe you guys have different opinions, and I'd be actually curious to hear them, right? Let's say the Juno example, right? It was a copy-paste error that no one checked. A non-technical person could have checked that, but.
You want to?
I think in general, we're really interested in making this a community of people outside of validators. It's just originating here. And I think if the verbiage up there says just, we are validators, that's because we are originating the idea and not that we hope to keep it exclusive there. Yeah.
And many of the discussions have been around what kind of dashboards or, tools are required for them to be able to know what decisions need to be made, but for the people who delegate to these services to know what they're voting on, to be able to see the discussions that precede those votes as well. Yeah.
Yeah, like if that's our competitive advantage for us to claim, we're good validators because we do a good job and we aren't going to run off with or make bad decisions or be corrupt. We have every incentive to build tooling to make it clearer and very easy for users to hold us accountable. And that's going to be hopefully where we can demonstrate very quickly, hopefully if we have financial resources to build tooling and walk the walk there to show people that we're serious about operating on the basis of values and not self-interest.
Eric, next.
So, as somebody who studied just the emergence of constitutional ordering, an observation I have is parties spring ubiquitously, and that suggests that they're providing real value to the people who coordinate around what they call a political party. And so, at a minimum, you're going to encounter hostility from the very notion of political parties for all of the historical reasons, but I would encourage focusing on two margins that political parties provide values to their participants within. We've ably covered the constituting a shared set of values within a group. There are huge within-group coordinative benefits to forming a political party and formalizing the shared set of values. But I do not think the OPEC cartel would describe itself as such, nor would they say we are colluding. From their perspective, they are coordinating beneficially the interests of their smaller group as pertains to a larger whole. And so the question I do have is, who opposes this declaration? And if they don't immediately, they soon will. There is an oppositional set. And so at a minimum, therefore the other vertical of benefits that political parties provide is with respect to other self-organizing stakeholder groups within the community, per Zargham's comment. So if you form a political party and an oppositional one doesn't yet exist, it will swiftly emerge for exactly the same reasons we've been describing. And they will take a very, very dim view of your statements that you're not colluding. Because from their perspective, you are fundamentally colluding. I'm not making that argument, but the oppositional nature of constitutional political economies means one party's coordination is from the other opposing party's perspective collusion.
Thanks, great point. There's possibly collusion going on that we don't see, that this is bringing to the surface, right? Coinbase, I don't know, institutional investors that we don't, who knows? Okay, so did you want to respond to that before we go back?
I think I agree. Like, it was interesting when we were talking about we want these, we had started from, we want standardization and responsibility and a framework that we can at least look into and then have the rest of the validator ecosystem kind of adopt. But then we were realizing that's us imagining ourselves as a central authority saying, oh, we know what's better, all of you should adopt it. And then we realized, okay, then, right, if we want to go on to the other end of the spectrum and allowing sort of a decentralized ethos to kind of guide what we believe in, then it has to be a smaller group. But then it's almost as if this maybe would work better if there was an other, right, what you're saying. There has to exist an opposing set of beliefs for this to at least be, right, cartels can be broken up and then there can be competition that supports they're checking and balancing each other. So I 100% do agree that I was almost of the mind of if there is something that we do set up as this let's say a coalition or a political party, that if you are kind of looking at this board game that you're drawing, then you have to make sure that there is a template for an opposition or an other for that to work. So.
Yeah, I kind of think the political party metaphor may not be as apt as just research effort, a political research effort. I know when I tend to think of what DAOs are really based on, what are the decision making, where's the power, it's not just validators or just token holders or just coders or anyone else. It's more there's absolute control. It's a plutocracy at one level. and it's absolutely like controlled by the validators at another level, and it's absolutely controlled by the coders at yet another level. And if consensus sort of works together to allow those different groups to exchange value in a way that's beneficial for everyone, then that group sort of exists. If that doesn't happen, then it sort of flies away essentially, or just breaks down and people go to some other area. And I'm very interested in the smaller off-chain private groups that steer a lot of the innovation that we're built on, right? Who knows who Satoshi was? And, you know, even with Cosmos, which a lot of this seems to be focused on, there's almost this sense of people who otherwise would fork and maybe even have threatened to fork or kind of sort of forked are still actually working on more or less the same code base and the same ecosystem and infrastructure. With Ethereum, you kind of had a similar split among the co-founders and people, but they ended up building separate chains, and maybe they will converge in an interchain way, but that wasn't as, it's not as easy as it is with Cosmos. And I kind of like that, because to me it implies, hey, look, at the end of the day, this stuff is really driven by people who are highly ambitious, highly energetic, sort of great founder theory, as Samaro Berja would say. And I think those people will, no matter what frameworks you put around them, will be the ones driving what it is that we do, and people who are learning or in the ecosystem can essentially follow and kind of digest what they're thinking and reflect on if it helps their bags or their portfolios or philosophies. But I imagine just doing, as you kind of brought up from your background, the digital ethnography of what really happens where money flows and power flows and conversation flows, and then just trying to have those things be more efficient seems maybe more practical or simple than assuming that there is a party and we have certain values. We're more at having observations and trying to improve the status quo.
So I just wanted to make a point when we were talking about the oppositional party that there's still a huge risk in having a two-party system. So the moment we acknowledge the fact it's beneficial to not have a single one, it's probably also worth noting that a dichotomy is not particularly healthy, and so that a larger number of smaller, at least partially differentiated groups could actually lead to a higher degree of political biodiversity and more meaningful choice for those who would be staking, delegating. And I don't want to derail too far down this direction, but whether or not we choose the term party or research initiative, as Jazir has put, I think that there's a particular, at least for me, an animating value would be steering away from the religious mode of politics towards a scientific mode of politics. And I don't mean in a religion of science sense. I mean in the sense that we collect the data, we talk about it, that discourse even within the party about whether or not a particular action is in alignment with those principles, etc., with evidence, with deference to the data collected, etc., as opposed to degrading into a sort of, you're with the party or against it, but actually having those, quote, parties being scientifically productive. And I think that blurs the line between party and research initiative. I don't really care which semantics one uses, but the actual substance of evaluating decisions and thinking about what it means needs to persist.
I'll just say briefly on the topic of opposition between political parties. So some of you here, I think, are familiar with we've done some research on crypto politics in sort of blockchain ecosystems, and there's clearly, already a lot of ideological diversity in this space, and what we don't see is as much, let's say, institutional diversity in terms of where those ideologies can go. So. I'm going to recall one of the sort of things that Daniel said that really sort of stuck with me, which was, if you disagree with us, then fight us. And that's, to us, that is part of the point. If you disagree with us, and we can sort of have this discussion and somehow surface that discussion in a way that is that appears as participation, then that is our goal. To increase the participation in these chains through some sort of institutional intervention that could look like a crypto political party, that could look like multiple parties. We could look like us forming a party and then breaking into multiple ones. that is, I think, like one of the outcomes that I would personally see as very positive, right? So opposition, bring it on.
Observation here. So, with the launch of a political party immediately here in the US, the thing that's striking is that this doesn't feel like a political party. This feels more like a parliament. And the very first thing that's happened here is a discussion around trying to sort of figure out what the truth of a series of principles are. And you know, as Eric's pointing out, you need competition there to do that. But the actual principles are a parliament or a senate that has a clear set of principles for discussion of anyone who wants to represent things, and then parliaments release, legislation or whatever, which is the analog of this is what we believe, or this is what we hold, what we have reasoned to be true, and it just may well be that it's not a political party you're trying to build; it's actually something closer to a parliament.
Well, so the governance structures exist already, right, on a lot of chains. So that would be the parliament. The difference between blockchain and traditional government is that traditional government can't exist without some document or, constitution, from if we're talking about modern government, instituting it. Whereas blockchains have sort of existed from a very technical, theoretical standpoint without that political theory coming at the same time. So you see more newer chains, or I guess, avant-garde chains are declaring constitutions after the fact. I think we actually today are trying to build some amount of consensus to say who agrees with us on this. That is sort of, hopefully, from our perspective, the first, discussion of this concept of a party that I think, we do feel accurately, hopefully, will represent what this is. I think when you look at blockchains as initially being a very financial and technological thing, at least from a conceptual standpoint, they came into the world where finance was something that actually people felt very, very cynical about. I mean, I think, one of the first blocks, or the first block of Bitcoin, was referencing the 2008 financial crisis. This thing came into existence at peak cynicism of finance. I think we're about at peak cynicism of politics right now. But in a similar way, we think that just because politics has been, something that's not very effective recently, at least in traditional government, does not mean we should abandon this concept or abandon the concept of parties and people working together towards shared values.
Hi, Rube.
So let's, so let's make that maybe the last comment and then a round of responses. And then we're going to sort of have some time for just relatively casual breakout sessions where we're going to sort of dive into some of these topics.
I think Jake might want to talk as well. My name is Eric Carlson. I run a small validator called Rhino. It's on a bunch of chains within the Cosmos. I think this is a great academic discussion that doesn't necessarily rely at all to reality. So the reality of the situation is you have validators similar to, that either are meme type validators or are doing promises or doing NFT drops, and those delegators are just being able to line up for something for free, or they think there's some sort of advantage to be gained. They're not picking validators based on how you guys vote. So it's like almost like if you want to make the bet, go back to US politics, it's like picking a senator based on who's going to give me an NFT drop in 6 months from now. That's literally what is happening, right? So if you look at, like, I don't want to call names, but if you look at like Pupmos or somebody similar to that who might be top 3 on 12 chains within the Cosmos, they have no self-bond. Everything that comes in, they IBC off, but yet they vote 8-12% of a riding vote based on the governance structure. I think that is awful. Like, I don't understand that at all. I think that is where this governance structure falls out. So my always point is, like, why do validators vote for non-voting delegators? I never understood that. There's nothing that makes the opinions in this room necessarily 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, or in Pupmos's case, 150,000 or 200,000 to 1 based on what they have self-delegated into this chain. So they have no personal investment in that. That is a marketing firm that is being able to drive delegations. They drive cash out, and then they're voting for 200,000 times that. This might not be a very popular opinion, but it is the reality of the situation. So this two governance and all this other type of stuff, you have groups voting large blocks who might not have really any sort of real understanding of the structure that's behind it, or are voting yes because that's what's easy to do, or other types of situations that I don't think maybe have the same rule set in terms of the common declarations, or even have the viewpoint of what the growth is within the cosmos. So I think there's a fundamental, and maybe it's a DAO situation, or a way to be able to change how this happens, or other types of things. But I think that this piece and what you guys are trying to achieve, this governance structure doesn't support. Like when you have 8% of the vote coming for somebody, because Orbital Apes on Evmos, good example of this, very junior validator, very nice people, not saying that, they have an NFT drop coming. They own, I think, 8 or 12% of Evmos right now, based off an NFT drop, right? And they have almost zero self-bond. That is not a governance structure. That is something totally different than this. So I appreciate the conversation. I totally understand what you guys are saying, but I just don't think the reality of the situation matches at all what you guys are trying to achieve. One more comment?
Yeah, sorry. A lot of people have been talking about Juno as well, yeah, sorry I came late. I think that we also need to think about some of the practical things that came up. Like you brought up the really good point about no one checking the code and the funds were sent to the wrong smart contract. I think we need to start actually just kind of breaking governance up a little bit more. Like the way the government works in the US or many companies is you have departments, and the departments specialize on different things. Rather than running everything through the validators who are responsible to vote on everything, I think I'm really starting to like this idea of sub-DAOs, because you can have a sub-DAO that is tasked specifically with a specific and ultimately answerable to the token holders. There's a lot I like in this, but I think we need to think about how we divide up responsibility for different types of tasks and different types of decisions. I think many validators would like this reality as well. You just want to focus on software upgrades and keeping the chain running. Do you want to focus on marketing sub-DAOs so we can, or do you want to focus on people are asking for funds to sponsor events? All these kinds of things that I don't think a lot of people that are validators really care on voting on, but certain people in the community definitely would. So I would really like us to think about, how we could maybe potentially divide up responsibilities a little bit more, whether it's in sub-DAOs. This is something we're hopefully starting to explore with sub-DAOs in Juno. Yeah, I hope in the breakout sessions we can kind of brainstorm a little bit about the kinds of things that we might build. But yeah, I think that it's really fun to get all high-minded and stuff, but we have some really practical things that we have to solve. Code was put out with a very obvious bug in it and no one checked it. And it's not just Juno, the same thing happened with Osmosis as well. So how do we create a group that's very much focused on quality? As these chains grow, there's so many different roles to fulfill, whether it is marketing or community or more politics kind of stuff. And then there's just straight up technical things or software upgrades, and then how do you incentivize those teams to do that? These are the questions I would really like to explore, but I'm really appreciating this conversation, and thank you for listening to me talk.
It's amazing. Ethan and then Zargan.
So just to build on that, there was a comment that we have parliament already in terms of the on-chain voting, but I would argue that's not really a parliament, it's just a vote, and we're actually missing a lot more structure on-chain. We're starting to see a few teams, optimisms experimenting with this House of Parliament or whatever it is, and so I'm curious what the feeling or the sentiment would be from validators directly about reducing somewhat explicitly the power that validators have in terms of their delegated voting power by electing bodies that can take charge of take certain responsibilities. For instance, there could be a small committee that promises to take a look at quality assurance on the code base, or to review certain pull requests, get involved in the development process, or otherwise opine more professionally on some controversial proposals or something like that, and not just provide a recommendation, but actually potentially have some weight in the in the governance, so that we can also, limit the effects of just like the raw economics, where there's like, one validator that is 12%. Maybe they shouldn't be able to wield 12% in the voting, but asking the validators directly, I understand, might be a bit of a conflict of interest. But curious what any of you have to think of that.
Let them respond. Do you want them to respond first, since you asked a question?
Go ahead.
Cool. So I actually wanted to respond somewhat directly to something that Eric said about the this sort of high and mightiness of this discussion of governance, and I actually think this uncovers something, the gap. So it's the epistemic gap between the theory and the practice, the observation and what we want. Often the next question is like, what's the shortest path between like what we're observing in real life and what we wish to be true? And actually, at least from my perspective, there's actually a relatively straightforward answer to that, and it's massively increasing the level of visibility of what's going on, because the number of people who are aware of what he just said is probably quite small. It may be largely true in this room, but it definitely doesn't extend very far beyond it, and the extent to which that behavior is tolerated at a social or cultural level is in a large part due to the fact that no one seems to care or call it out, or I hate to say that politics is closely related to culture and what is acceptable norm of behavior. And well, if no one's paying attention and no one is exercising essentially a normative pushback against that behavior in a public way, it's going to keep happening. And so if you had to ask me, and I get to talk, so I'm going to say it, I think we should just build a bunch of stuff that makes it really obvious that that's what's going on, and then see if the behavior changes. If it still doesn't change, then we can figure out the next thing. But that's a relatively straightforward technical solution for a first step with respect to a behavioral problem.
Yeah, Daniel, and did you have a response over there? No.
It's never gonna end. We're gonna keep talking. But I think that, right, with Eric is absolutely right. Like, there's a lot of this stuff that's broken. If the system had been designed for stakers to hold us accountable and they are not, then maybe we change the system so that they are, like, if they don't participate as they should be, as the rules are defined, then make it so that they have to listen, right? So like, if they're not participating, then punish them. And then they're going to be like, okay, now there's accountability. Now, like, stuff is real. My money is on the line. Maybe if they don't want to participate like that, then they shouldn't hold the token, or they shouldn't stake with a validator. Even if, same goes with validators as well. Like, we've seen this happen on Kava. A lot of centralized exchanges hold the majority of the stake there, and there have been times where we couldn't even hit quorum because they were not participating. So punish them. Like, if we have the opportunity, they're not paying attention to these votes, zero their balances if they're not going to be paying attention. And then they're going to start paying attention, right? There's like this, you have to make them care if they want to participate. And maybe it does cost something, maybe it has to be dramatic like that for people to just kind of be slapped upside the head just to understand. But that's obviously at a very extreme, like, extreme, but like, how else do you get people to care, right? You can't.
Yeah, I think those are both great points. And the other thing is, like, even a stepwise there might be just user experience. Like, how are we displaying these choices to delegates, and how do we, MintScan, for example, highlights the top 10 validators with a different color bullet. If I don't understand this ecosystem, are these the safe people? Is this where I should be spending my time, or is this where it should be? And then you get to, obviously you get to kind of more breakout in terms of some challenges in terms of just the delegation spread and those types of things. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the top 10, but how do you want to be able to change the UX to be able to drive some of that behavior? Because I do think that people that come into this don't. I mean, when you're presenting 125 icons and some of these types of things, they're either they're picking it based on moniker, which, hey, I'm just the same way. Are you based on a moniker? Are you doing something till you remember who that is? You're not going to read 125 governance structures to say, how does my validator vote, right? And people who would do that would vote themselves, so it doesn't matter. So the other one, what you're really talking to is people who do not do any governance, who don't care about that, but are making decisions around that structure. So I think UX has a big piece of that as well. And I think I've beat this drum a few times on Twitter and other types of things, but I think being able to drive, maybe those should be sorted based on vote. Maybe they should be sorted based on self-delegation. Maybe they shouldn't be sorted at all, which is kind of like what the OmniFlex team does and just randomize things. Maybe there should be something that's governance-based in terms of giving a little bit more information about a validator on those websites to understand how they have voted. Or maybe there should be a statement in the description. Maybe we should add a field in there around values and like how they choose to vote and delegate. Like something else that we can kind of boil up in the UX to make people have better decisions around that. Because it is important, and so it's a big piece of that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think with these types of things, it's useful to go back to the alignment of incentives, right? That is where you're going to find the greatest participation. We have the market, the global markets that really exemplify that for us. So when we talk about things like security, when we hear things like we need security, we want to do additional things like be climate positive or whatever this case may be. It's maybe not so much as looking at who can govern this or having some external body that says this is how it should work. It's actually, we have a model for this, and it's associations, right? And associations are usually represented by logos. And so to the point of like a social interface problem of like, how do you surface this additional information to the community so that they might take more informed votes? Or how do you advertise the fact that, beyond just APY, but how do you advertise the fact that you make a climate positive pledge or that you have a stronger security model, right? Then you really get into this idea that each validator themselves could get into this vertically integrated model where you take care of security and you donate to other causes and you do these other things and you advertise your own state, your service, right? You could do that, but the power of associations is that you get to tap into economies of scale. So, you know, maybe as a party, you know, this political party, maybe that's a loaded term, but maybe it's about tapping into these economies of scale where a group of validators come together and they all say, it is worth it for us to have this icon that says enhanced security or whatever it is, and they all pay into it so not any one of them has the burden themselves. And then, you know, this idea about the social interface problem, like how can we model this data and provide it in human readable ways, right? Because that data is there, it's hard to parse, right? This is something that a set of validators could then also pay into, and over time the idea and the hope is that these logos or these associations come to stand for something that is a value add to those that are actually doing the staking, and then it's beholden to the other stakers that don't have those logos to make the case of why they don't. But I think that's probably a useful reframing of how you can keep the alignment of incentives in play without having to necessarily like blow up the system and start over.
What? Thanks, Ellie. I think it was Daniel. Sorry, what's your name? Sorry. I think it was Daniel earlier who used the term fiduciary. And when we start talking about things in terms of fiduciary relationships and concepts like agency, this is perhaps where the commons could serve a very valuable purpose, which also ties into what you said and what Eric said as well, which is that idea that if the commons sets forth very clearly that validators engage in a fiduciary relationship on behalf of the delegators, and that anyone who signs on to the commons agrees to adhere to that sort of process, well, then the idea that we could, in various sources, various places, that we could label certain validators as this is someone who is a signatory to the commons, right? Indicating that they have pledged to behave in a particular fashion, and that badge could be taken away should that not be the case. Then we start to move beyond merely relying on simple incentive structures. We also have, you know, a stick to go with that carrot, right? So just as sort of an attempt to sort of synthesize that, because when we start talking about fiduciary relationships, at least within the law, we talk about a legal responsibility. We talk about an act of agency, and that brings with it certain established responsibilities.
Yeah, just to respond directly to that, one of the institutional forms that we kind of cycled through and actually had long conversations about was possibly like organizing this as almost kind of like a FINRA-like regulatory body, right? Which is exactly like following on like fiduciary responsibility, making sure fiduciary responsibilities are fulfilled, and having not like a super big stick, but like a small stick that you can sort of like whack people and say, hey, this is like kind of a problem, and you know, it's not legally binding, but it's sort of a signal that something's going off here, and usually people, you know, it often does have the effect of correcting some sort of like having a course correction, right? And just remind you, like FINRA is like a self-regulated, it's sort of voluntary association of a bunch of financial bodies that is actually quite effective and set standards. So that could be, you know, a potential outcome, or sort of like one of the sort of ways one of the sort of like directions we lean into in terms of the, let's say, the proposals we want to pass, or the sort of institutions we want to create, the rules we want to make. But I think at first, like at the base level, you know, we first just need to like have like some level of organizational cohesion, or you know, like cohesion around values, around the set of shared beliefs, and that's kind of what's being articulated up there. Whether you sort of like, it's not like a, I think that like I learned in these conversations that, you know, before we try to have like technical agreement and try to solve technical problems, or you know, formal problems around like sort of rulemaking around like financial entities, you need to get to the sort of, we need to get everybody in the same place on a values level, on a very basic level. Like, this is what we believe, this is what we care about. And that's the work that's been done over the last 4 months. And I think it's, you know, it's easy to say like values this. It's like, it's kind of like obscure and abstract, but it's actually so incredibly important, and it does take work. And I'm proud of the folks here for putting in that work.
Just real quick, the logic from the gentleman in the Amiga shirt struck me as a direct characterization of the emergence of guild marks that eventually became trademark law. But then we heard other private industry self-regulatory solutions like FINRA, as well as what is construed as an appropriate fiduciary duty. And so I think alongside the apt metaphor of political parties, a lot of thought should be given to, are you actually creating something akin to a trademark and the signaling value that it has? And you tend to see the emergence of industry self-regulation in cases where information asymmetries are particularly acute. At some point, your users, despite a lot of transparency, are going to be relying on a trademark as opposed to a deep understanding of the behavior of validators surrounding a question they don't fully understand. And so to me, it's interesting, but many of these institutional solutions have emerged to ameliorate very similar problems in the past.
Teddy, did you have a final response? And then I'm going to hand back to Josh to wind us up.
No.
Nice. Okay. Okay, so it's it is 5:50, so around 10 minutes before the when this is supposed to end. So I'm going to just cancel the breakout sessions and give people time to like a little bit more time to enjoy the food and just hang out. I was talking to Pia Mancini. I don't know if you guys know her, but she's one of the founders of the Net Party. So she started her own political party. And the thing that she said to me that I had to be most careful about was, what is the follow through? You know, we have this conversation, people are excited, it's like actually really scintillating, but what happens next? So for me and for us, one of the things that we want to do is actually start creating some on-chain proposals, substantial proposals, and actually start trying to organize and pass them. We're going to be coordinating this through a series of weekly calls as well as monthly open community calls. If you go to validatorcommons.org, there'll be places, plenty of sort of like, just fill out a form, just basically drop your email, and we will sort of send you back the Zoom links and all the sort of necessary sort of like follow-ups, because we really want to include more people. This is not just about validators, once again. This is like, we want all sorts of different interested parties, core teams and foundations, just individual token holders, as well as outside external bodies, to be participating in this and helping us think through what is the future of the Validator Commons. How can we actually contribute to the development of this ecosystem, and what are our next steps? The point is, there are concrete next steps and join the conversation. It'll be happening every week. All right. Thanks, everybody.